Some nights, it's not the silence that hurts. It's everything your mind keeps holding on to. Bills that don't stop coming. Conversations that didn't go the way you hoped. A body that feels weaker than it used to. Relationships that feel fragile. Questions about the future that have no clear answers. During the day, you keep going. You function. You adapt. You do what needs to be done. But at night, when the world finally slows down, all of it comes back. The pressure, the fear of losing control, the feeling that if you stop thinking, everything might fall apart. Most people believe they have to carry all of this alone. That strength means staying alert. That rest must be earned by solving everything first. But that belief is what keeps the mind exhausted. Long before our modern problems existed, there were people who faced uncertainty just as real. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while surrounded by war, disease, and betrayal. Seneca lived under constant political threat, knowing his life could end at any moment. They knew loss, they knew fear, they knew instability, and yet they discovered something simple and difficult. Not everything is yours to control, and trying to control everything is what breaks the mind. This is not a magic solution. This is not something that will erase your problems overnight. Your financial worries won't disappear instantly. Your health won't suddenly be perfect. Your relationships won't fix themselves while you sleep. But if you stay here, if you listen quietly, you will not leave empty. Because tonight is not about fixing your life. It's about setting something down. About learning gently that some things can wait. That some weight does not belong in your hands right now. This space is here to remind you of something you've forgotten in the noise of everyday life. You are allowed to rest, even when life feels uncertain. You don't need to control everything tonight. Let's begin. Lesson 1. The mind grabs control when it feels unsafe. At night, the mind does something strange. It reaches out, not with the hands, but with thoughts. It tries to hold things in place, the future, the past, the things that might go wrong, the things that already feel fragile. During the day, this need stays quiet. There is movement, noise, responsibility. You are busy responding. But when the world slows down, when there is finally nothing demanding your attention, the mind feels exposed. And when the mind feels unsafe, it tries to control. Control does not begin as arrogance, it begins as protection. The mind tells itself, if I think this through one more time, I'll be ready. If I keep watching, nothing bad will surprise me. If I don't let go, I can prevent pain. So it stays alert. It revisits conversations. It replays decisions. It imagines outcomes that haven't happened yet. Not because you enjoy it, but because the mind believes vigilance equals safety. This is why control feels so convincing at night. The silence removes distractions, but it also removes the feeling of stability. And the mind reacts. You might recognize this moment. You lie down, tired, and suddenly your thoughts speed up. You remember a bill that still needs to be paid, a message that felt cold, a body that hasn't been feeling right lately, a future that feels uncertain. Nothing is actually happening right now. And yet, the mind tightens. It starts managing problems that are not present. It carries tomorrow into tonight. This is not weakness. It is instinct. Long before modern life, people noticed this pattern. The old Stoics understood something simple. When the mind feels threatened, it reaches for control, even when control is impossible. They didn't judge this reaction. They observed it. They saw that the desire to control is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of fear trying to protect itself. Think of someone who keeps checking the door at night. They don't do it because danger is certain. They do it because uncertainty feels unbearable. The mind works the same way. It checks, it watches, it holds. But holding everything does not make you safer. It only makes you tired. There is a quiet moment when this becomes clear. You may have experienced it before. You stay awake thinking, and at some point, you realize that nothing has improved. The problem is still there. The uncertainty is still there. The only thing that has changed is how exhausted you feel. This is the hidden cost of control. Control demands constant attention, and attention is energy. The more you monitor life, the less energy remains for rest. At night, this becomes obvious. The body wants to sleep, but the mind refuses to stand down, because it believes that letting go is dangerous. But here is the truth the night gently reveals. Control does not keep you safe. It keeps you tense. There is a difference. Safety is quiet. Control is loud. Safety allows rest. Control demands vigilance. The Stoic insight is not to shame the mind for this behavior. It is to recognize it, to notice, without fighting, that the mind is trying to protect you in the only way it knows. And then to question, softly, is this helping me right now? Not to answer with logic, not to argue, just to notice. You don't need to stop the thoughts. You don't need to push them away. You only need to see them for what they are. A protective reflex, not a command. When this recognition happens, even slightly, something shifts. The grip loosens. The mind realizes it doesn't need to guard everything at once. You might notice this in a small way. A breath that deepens without effort. A moment where a thought passes without being followed. A few seconds of quiet between worries. That quiet is not forced. It appears when control is no longer believed. Tonight is not asking you to abandon responsibility. It is asking you to pause vigilance. There is nothing you can fix at this hour that requires this level of attention. Your mind does not need to stay armed while you rest. Even the Stoics, who valued discipline and strength, understood the importance of timing. They knew that wisdom includes knowing when not to act. The night is not the time for control. It is the time for release. Not dramatic release, not a decision, just a soft acknowledgement. I don't need to hold everything right now. You can let the mind keep its thoughts without obeying them. You can let uncertainty exist without wrestling it. Nothing bad happens when you stop watching for a while. The world continues. Life continues. And you are allowed to rest inside that. This is where calm begins. Not in control, but in trust. Not trust that everything will be perfect, but trust that you don't have to manage everything tonight. That is enough for now. Lesson 2. Control often looks like responsibility. Most people don't try to control everything because they want power. They do it because they want to be responsible. Responsibility sounds noble. It feels mature. It feels necessary. You grow up hearing that responsible people think ahead, anticipate problems, and stay alert. So over time, control starts to look like care. If you worry, it means you care. If you plan constantly, it means you are serious. If you stay mentally busy, it means you're doing your part. This is where the confusion begins. Because caring and controlling are not the same thing. You can care deeply about your work without replaying every mistake at night. You can care about your family without carrying their future on your shoulders. You can care about your health without monitoring every sensation with fear. But the mind often mixes these things together. It tells you that if you stop thinking, you stop caring. That if you let go mentally, you are being careless. That rest is a form of irresponsibility. This belief is powerful and very common. You see it in everyday moments. Someone lies in bed thinking about an unpaid bill. Not because the bill can be paid at midnight, but because letting go feels like neglect. Another person replays a conversation, wondering if they said the wrong thing. Not because the past can be changed, but because silence feels like failure. In both cases, the mind is not solving anything. It is performing responsibility, but responsibility does not require constant mental presence. The Stoic thinkers noticed this long ago. They observed that much of what exhausts the mind is not action, but unnecessary attention. They made a quiet distinction. There is what requires your effort, and there is what only demands your worry. Worry feels active, but it produces nothing. Effort is useful, but it has its moment. Night is not that moment. True responsibility knows when to act and when to stop acting. Imagine someone holding a heavy bag all day. They carry it carefully. They don't drop it. They take pride in managing the weight. But when they arrive home, they keep holding it. They sit with it. They lie down with it. At that point, holding the bag is no longer responsible. It's unnecessary. The mind does the same thing. It keeps holding problems even when there is nothing to be done. Not because it must, but because it doesn't know how to separate care from control. This is where exhaustion grows. Mental fatigue often comes from staying on duty too long. You may notice this in yourself. Even when nothing urgent is happening, your mind stays alert. You feel guilty when you relax. You feel uneasy when you stop thinking, as if something important might be forgotten. But what is really being forgotten is balance. Responsibility does not mean constant pressure. It means appropriate response. The Stoic approach was never about abandoning duty. It was about placing duty where it belongs. They believed a calm mind makes better decisions than a tense one. That clarity comes from rest, not from force. When you confuse control with responsibility, you end up exhausting the very mind you depend on. You may tell yourself, "I'll rest once everything is handled." But everything is never fully handled. Life always leaves something open. And if rest is postponed until complete control is achieved, rest never arrives. There is a quiet shift that happens when this is seen clearly. You realize that letting go mentally does not mean letting go of your values. It means trusting timing. You can still care about tomorrow without dragging it into tonight. You can still be responsible without keeping watch every second. Responsibility includes knowing when thinking is no longer helpful. The mind resists this at first. It worries that if it steps back, things will fall apart. But experience shows the opposite. Problems remain whether you watch them or not. Often, they are easier to face after rest. This is not avoidance. It is preparation. A rested mind sees options a tired mind cannot. So tonight, responsibility does not ask you to solve. It asks you to pause. Not because the problem doesn't matter, but because you do. You are not neglecting your life by resting. You are protecting your ability to live it well. Control is loud. Responsibility is quiet. Control demands constant attention. Responsibility knows when to step away. Understanding this difference is not weakness, it is maturity. And it is one of the calmest strengths a person can develop. Lesson 3. Wanting control is not the problem. There is nothing wrong with wanting control. This matters because many people blame themselves for it. They see their need to control as a flaw, a weakness, something to fix. But the desire for control is not the enemy. It is a signal. It appears when something feels unstable, when the ground beneath you does not feel solid, when the future feels uncertain. The mind reaches for control the way a hand reaches for a railing in the dark. Not to dominate, but to steady itself. This instinct is human. The problem begins only when the mind believes that control is the only way to feel safe. That belief quietly shapes behavior. You start thinking that if you stop planning, things will fall apart. If you stop worrying, you are being careless. If you loosen your grip, you are inviting failure. So you hold tighter. You replay scenarios. You imagine outcomes. You prepare for conversations that may never happen. Not because you enjoy it, but because letting go feels dangerous. This is where the mind gets trapped. Control starts as protection. Then it turns into pressure. You can see this in everyday life. Someone checks their phone repeatedly, even when no message has arrived. Not because there is news, but because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Another person keeps reviewing their finances late at night, even though no decision can be made at that hour. The numbers don't change, but the checking continues. In both cases, control is not solving anything. It is soothing anxiety temporarily. The Stoic thinkers were clear about this distinction. They did not criticize the instinct to seek control. They questioned the assumption behind it. They asked whether constant mental effort actually protects us or whether it quietly drains us. They observed that strength is not built by tightening the grip endlessly, but by knowing when to loosen it. Wanting control means you care. It means you want things to go well. But caring does not require constant supervision. There is a difference between steering a ship and gripping the wheel in a storm that cannot be calmed. At some point, gripping harder does not help. It only exhausts the one holding on. Many people reach this point without realizing it. They wake up tired, not because they worked too hard, but because their mind never rested. They feel tense even on calm days. They feel uneasy even when nothing is wrong. This is what happens when control becomes a habit instead of a tool. A tool is used when needed and put down afterward. A habit stays active even when it no longer serves. Control was never meant to be permanent. The Stoics understood this through experience. They lived in uncertain times. War, illness, exile, political danger were part of daily life. They could not control outcomes, but they could control their relationship to effort. They learned to act when action mattered, and to release when action was no longer possible. That balance was not passive, it was disciplined. The modern mind often loses this balance. It stays in problem-solving mode even when problems cannot be solved. This creates an illusion, the illusion that thinking equals progress. But thinking without clarity is not progress. It is noise, and noise increases fatigue. There is a quiet relief when this is seen honestly. You realize that wanting control does not make you weak. Believing you must always control does. You can allow the desire for control to exist without obeying it. Just because the mind wants to manage everything does not mean everything requires management. This shift does not happen through force. It happens through recognition. You notice the urge to control. You don't fight it. You don't justify it. You simply see it. And in seeing it clearly, you create a small space between the urge and the action. In that space, choice returns. You can ask yourself simple questions. Is this something I can influence right now? Is this the right moment to engage with this? Is holding on to this helping, or just keeping me tense? These questions are not meant to be answered obsessively. They are meant to interrupt automatic effort. Often, the honest answer is clear. Nothing can be done right now. And when nothing can be done, rest becomes the most rational response. This is not resignation. It is wisdom. The Stoic approach does not ask you to stop caring. It asks you to care with intelligence, to place your energy where it matters and remove it where it only creates strain. Control, when used correctly, is useful. Control, when used constantly, is destructive. Understanding this difference changes how the mind behaves at night. The thoughts may still appear. The urge to manage may still arise. But you no longer believe that obeying it is necessary. You allow the mind to want control without turning that desire into action. And slowly, the grip loosens, not because you forced it, but because you no longer mistake tension for responsibility. That is not giving up. That is growing up. Lesson 4. Night does not create pressure, it reveals it. Many people believe the night is the problem. They say their thoughts get worse after dark. That anxiety grows. That worries become heavier. But the night is not creating anything new. It is revealing what was already there. During the day, the mind is protected by movement. Tasks, conversations, noise, and responsibilities keep attention outward. There is always something to react to. This constant engagement acts like a cover. It doesn't remove pressure, it hides it. When night arrives, that cover is lifted. The phone is quieter. The world slows down. There is no one asking for anything. And suddenly, the mind feels exposed. The thoughts that appear now did not begin at night. They were carried quietly all day. Uncertainty about money, tension in relationships, concerns about health, doubts about choices made or not made. They were there in the background, waiting for space. The night simply provides that space. This is why trying to fix the night rarely works. If you treat nighttime thinking as the enemy, you miss the real issue. The issue is not darkness, it is accumulation. The Stoic thinkers understood this dynamic well. They observed that the mind becomes restless, not because life is difficult, but because the mind refuses to set things down. They noticed that distraction postpones pressure, but silence exposes it. This exposure can feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to staying busy. It can feel like something is wrong, but nothing is wrong. The mind is simply doing what it does when it is no longer occupied. You may recognize this pattern. You go through the day handling things one by one. You tell yourself you'll think about certain issues later. You stay functional. Then at night, everything arrives at once. It feels overwhelming, not because the problems grew, but because there is no distraction left. This is where control instincts intensify. The mind looks at the exposed pressure and tries to manage it all at once. It replays events. It imagines outcomes. It searches for certainty. Not because solutions are available, but because exposure feels unsafe. But pressure revealed is not pressure created. This distinction matters. If the night were truly the cause, changing the environment would solve the problem. More noise, more distraction, more stimulation. But these only delay the moment of exposure. The Stoics did not avoid this moment. They respected it. They believed that clarity comes not from constant activity, but from seeing what is already present. They used quiet moments to observe the mind's habits, not to judge them, not to eliminate them, but to understand them. Night offers this opportunity naturally. It shows you what you've been carrying. That can feel heavy at first, but it also offers a chance to respond differently. Consider someone who has been carrying a tense conversation all day. They smiled, they nodded, they moved on. But the body remembered. At night, the scene reappears, not because the night is cruel, but because the mind finally has space to speak. The same happens with financial worry, health concerns, uncertainty about the future. None of these start at night. Night simply removes the mask. When this is understood, something changes. You stop blaming the night, and you stop fighting it. Instead of trying to silence the mind, you begin to listen differently. Not to solve, not to analyze, but to recognize. The Stoic approach here is subtle. It does not say, push the thoughts away. It says, see them clearly, without panic. Pressure revealed does not require immediate action. It requires acknowledgement. Many people try to respond to nighttime pressure as if it were an emergency. But emergencies demand action. Pressure demands perspective. There is a difference. Action is useful when something can be changed. Perspective is needed when something must be carried differently. The night is a space for perspective, not for decisions, not for control, just for seeing. When you allow pressure to be seen without reacting to it, it changes, not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually. The mind learns that exposure is not danger, that silence is not a threat, that seeing pressure does not mean you must resolve it immediately. This is where fatigue begins to soften, not because problems disappear, but because the mind stops treating them as urgent. Urgency is what keeps the system tense. When urgency fades, the pressure becomes manageable. The Stoics believed that strength lies in responding appropriately to reality, not in reacting automatically. Nighttime pressure asks for awareness, not intervention. You are not failing because your mind is active at night. You are becoming aware of what matters. The mistake is thinking that awareness requires control. It does not. It requires patience. The night does not demand solutions. It offers clarity. And clarity does not come from force. It comes from seeing things as they are, without trying to change them too quickly. When you stop blaming the night, you stop fighting yourself. And that alone reduces the pressure more than control ever could. Lesson 5. The hidden cost of constant control. Control feels productive. It gives the impression that something is being handled, that nothing is being ignored, that you are staying on top of things. But there is a cost that often goes unnoticed. The cost is not obvious at first. It doesn't arrive as a sudden collapse. It builds quietly. Every time the mind checks, monitors, anticipates, it spends energy. Not the kind of energy you notice immediately, but the kind that wears down clarity. You may still function well. You may still get things done. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. Inside, however, something changes. The mind becomes tense, even in calm moments. Silence feels uncomfortable. Rest feels incomplete. This is the price of constant control. You can see this in simple situations. Someone keeps revisiting a work problem long after the workday has ended, not because a solution is available, but because stopping feels irresponsible. Another person replays a personal conversation again and again, searching for the perfect response that was never said. The moment has passed, but the mind keeps holding it. In both cases, control is no longer useful. It has turned into habit, and habits consume energy even when they produce nothing. The Stoic thinkers were deeply aware of this dynamic. They noticed that the mind becomes exhausted not only by what happens, but by how long it refuses to let go. They understood that effort has value only when it leads somewhere. Effort without direction is waste. Control, when extended beyond its moment, becomes exactly that: effort without direction. One of the quiet dangers of constant control is that it narrows perception. When the mind is busy monitoring everything, it loses the ability to see clearly. You become reactive instead of thoughtful. You respond from tension instead of judgment. This is why people who try to control everything often feel overwhelmed by small things. Their system is already overloaded. The problem is not the situation. It is the accumulated strain. There is also an emotional cost. Constant control creates a background feeling of dissatisfaction. No matter how much you manage, it never feels enough. There is always something else to check, something else to prepare for. This creates a quiet sense of failure, as if you are always one step behind, even when you are doing your best. Over time, this erodes confidence. You begin to doubt your ability to handle things naturally. You rely more and more on monitoring and less on trust. This is not strength. It is tension disguised as responsibility. The Stoics believed that a calm mind is more capable than a strained one. They did not aim to eliminate effort. They aimed to place effort where it mattered. They understood that constant vigilance does not create security. It creates fatigue, and fatigue distorts judgment. A tired mind sees threats where none exist. It magnifies uncertainty. It reacts quickly and regrets later. This is one of the hidden costs of control. It weakens the very abilities it is trying to protect. You may notice this in moments when you are exhausted. Decisions feel heavier. Simple tasks feel complicated. Patience wears thin, not because the tasks are difficult, but because the mind is depleted. This depletion is not solved by more control. It is caused by it. There is a revealing moment many people experience. They finally let go, not by choice, but by exhaustion. They stop thinking because they cannot continue. And in that moment, they often notice something surprising. Nothing falls apart. The problem remains what it was. The world continues. The feared consequences do not appear. This moment exposes a truth that the Stoics emphasized quietly. Much of what we try to control does not require our constant attention. Life does not collapse when the mind rests. In fact, it often becomes easier to handle. When energy returns, clarity returns. When clarity returns, decisions improve. This does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means redefining it. Responsibility is not measured by mental pressure. It is measured by appropriate action. There are times to act, and there are times to step back. Knowing the difference is wisdom. The hidden cost of constant control is that it keeps you from learning this difference. It keeps you stuck in effort, even when effort is no longer useful. Letting go of control does not mean becoming careless. It means becoming selective. Selective with attention. Selective with energy. You do not need to manage everything to live responsibly. You need to manage what truly depends on you and release the rest. This distinction is not always easy, but it becomes clearer when you pay attention to fatigue. Fatigue is information. It tells you that effort has exceeded usefulness. The Stoic response to this is not guilt, it is adjustment. When you recognize the cost of constant control, you gain a choice. You can continue holding everything and accept the exhaustion that follows. Or you can place control back in its proper place, as a tool, not a permanent state. This choice does not require dramatic change. It begins with small moments. Moments when you notice the urge to check again and decide not to. Moments when you allow a problem to wait without feeling negligent. These moments restore energy without effort. They create space. And in that space, the mind remembers how to function without strain. That is not weakness. That is intelligence. And it is one of the most valuable skills a person can develop. Lesson 6. Admitting limits is not weakness. There is a quiet fear behind the need for control. It is the fear of limits. Limits suggest that something might be out of reach, that effort might not be enough, that outcomes may not follow intention. For many people, this idea feels threatening, so the mind resists it. It tells itself that with enough attention, enough planning, enough vigilance, everything can be managed. That limits are temporary. That control can stretch further. But this resistance creates tension, because limits exist whether we accept them or not. The Stoic thinkers were not afraid of limits. They considered them a starting point. They understood that clarity begins when a person sees where their influence ends, not as a loss, but as information. Admitting limits does not shrink you. It frees you. Most exhaustion comes not from what you do, but from what you refuse to acknowledge. You may notice this in small moments. A person keeps trying to fix a relationship that requires two people to change. They analyze every message, every tone, every pause. They search for the perfect way to respond. But the other person remains the same. The effort continues, not because it works, but because admitting the limit feels like giving up. Another person keeps worrying about a health issue that cannot be fully controlled. They read, monitor, compare symptoms. They try to predict outcomes. But the uncertainty remains. In both cases, the struggle is not with the situation itself. It is with the boundary. The mind does not want to accept that some things cannot be managed alone, so it pushes harder. This push is often praised in modern culture. We admire persistence. We celebrate never giving up. But persistence without discernment becomes self-punishment. The Stoics made a careful distinction. They believed effort should be placed where it has effect, and released where it does not. This was not pessimism. It was realism. They understood that strength is not proven by fighting reality. It is proven by cooperating with it. Admitting limits does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming precise. When you know where your influence ends, you stop wasting energy past that point. That energy returns to you. Many people fear that if they admit limits, they will lose control completely. But the opposite is true. Clear limits create stability. Imagine someone trying to carry water in their hands. They squeeze tighter, thinking it will help, but the water keeps slipping through. Eventually, they need a container. Limits are that container. They shape effort. Without limits, effort spills everywhere. Mental fatigue often signals that effort has lost its container. The mind keeps reaching beyond what is possible. It keeps trying to manage outcomes that depend on chance, other people, or time. This creates a constant sense of strain. Admitting limits releases that strain. You may feel resistance to this idea. A voice inside may say, "If I accept limits, I will stop trying." But acceptance does not stop action. It stops useless action. It refines action. The Stoic approach was never about doing less. It was about doing what matters. They understood that peace comes not from unlimited control, but from appropriate control. There is a calm confidence that appears when limits are acknowledged. You stop arguing with reality. You stop measuring yourself against impossible standards. You begin to act from clarity instead of fear. This does not mean problems disappear. It means your relationship to them changes. You no longer feel personally threatened by uncertainty. You no longer interpret every obstacle as failure. You see obstacles as part of the landscape, not as signs that you are doing something wrong. This shift has a direct effect on the mind. When limits are admitted, the mind relaxes. It no longer needs to stay alert all the time. It no longer feels responsible for everything. This relaxation is not collapse, it is relief. You may notice moments when you say internally, "This is not fully in my hands." Not with bitterness, not with resignation, but with honesty. And in that honesty, something softens. The mind stops pushing against the edge of what it cannot change. It stays where it has ground. This is where effectiveness returns. A person who accepts limits often makes better decisions. They conserve energy. They choose timing carefully. They respond instead of react. This is quiet strength, not loud, not dramatic, but stable. The Stoics believed that freedom begins when a person stops demanding more from reality than it can give. That belief remains relevant. Many modern struggles are intensified by the refusal to accept limits. We want certainty in uncertain situations, control in complex systems, guarantees where none exist. This desire is understandable, but it is also exhausting. Admitting limits does not remove uncertainty. It removes the extra burden of fighting it. You still act, you still care, but you stop carrying what was never yours to carry. This distinction changes how the mind behaves, especially at night. When you accept limits during the day, the night becomes quieter. Not because problems vanish, but because the mind no longer believes it must solve everything immediately. Admitting limits is not weakness, it is clarity. And clarity is one of the strongest foundations a calm mind can stand on. Lesson 7. Some things are not yours to carry. There is a difference between being affected by something and being responsible for it. The mind often ignores this difference. When something touches you emotionally, when it disrupts your plans or challenges your sense of stability, the mind assumes ownership. It tells itself, if this affects me, it must be mine to handle. This assumption feels logical. It feels mature. But it is not always true. Many things influence your life without belonging on your shoulders. The Stoic thinkers were attentive to this distinction. They noticed that much of human suffering comes not from events themselves, but from claiming responsibility for what lies outside one's reach. They did not deny impact. They denied ownership. You can feel the impact of a situation without carrying it as a personal burden. This is a subtle idea. but it changes everything. Consider how easily the mind collects weight. A co-worker's mood affects the atmosphere of your day. A news headline unsettles you. A comment from someone close lingers longer than it should. None of these things are choices you made. None of them are actions you control. Yet the mind holds them as if they require management. It replays them. It analyzes them. It searches for the right response. This holding feels like responsibility, but it is often unnecessary weight. You may recognize this pattern in your own life. Someone you care about is struggling. You listen, you empathize, and slowly, their worry becomes yours. You think about it at night. You feel tension you cannot explain. You imagine outcomes you cannot influence. Caring quietly turns into carrying. The Stoic insight here is not indifference. It is clarity. You can care without absorbing. You can support without becoming responsible for outcomes. The mind resists this idea at first. It worries that if it stops carrying, it stops being compassionate. But compassion does not require burden. In fact, burden often distorts compassion. When you carry too much, you lose balance. You become anxious instead of helpful, reactive instead of present. This is why the Stoics emphasized inner boundaries, not walls, but limits. They believe that peace depends on knowing what belongs inside your control and what belongs outside it. This boundary is not fixed. It must be recognized repeatedly, because the mind naturally expands responsibility. It takes on other people's expectations, other people's emotions, even other people's mistakes. It does this quietly, without asking permission. Over time, the accumulation becomes heavy. Mental fatigue often comes from this hidden accumulation. You may feel tired without knowing why. You may feel pressured even on calm days. The weight you feel may not belong to your own actions. It may belong to things you were never meant to carry. This realization is uncomfortable at first. It challenges a familiar identity. Many people define themselves by how much they can handle. They take pride in carrying more than others, in staying strong, in not dropping anything. But strength without boundaries turns into strain. The Stoics believe that true strength includes restraint, knowing when to act and when to step back, knowing what is yours and what must remain outside. This is not selfishness. It is sustainability. A person who carries everything eventually carries nothing well. A person who chooses carefully remains steady. You may notice moments when this distinction becomes clear. A problem appears in your mind, and you ask yourself quietly, is this something I can actually influence right now? Often, the honest answer is no. The situation involves other people, time, chance. Recognizing this does not remove the problem, but it removes unnecessary pressure. The mind relaxes slightly when it stops claiming ownership over everything. This relaxation is not passive, it is intelligent. It conserves energy for what truly matters. The Stoics did not believe in withdrawing from life. They believed in engaging wisely. They knew that attention is a limited resource. Where you place it shapes your experience. When attention is spread everywhere, nothing receives it fully. When attention is placed with care, clarity increases. You are not required to carry the weight of the world to live responsibly. You are required to know your role. Your role includes effort. It includes care. But it also includes release. Release of outcomes you cannot guarantee. Release of reactions you cannot control. Release of burdens that never belong to you. This release does not happen all at once. It begins with small recognitions, moments when you notice the mind reaching for something and gently choosing not to pick it up. Moments when you say internally, "This affects me, but it is not mine to manage." These moments restore balance. They reduce mental noise. They soften fatigue. Over time, they change how the night feels. The mind no longer arrives at night carrying everything it encountered during the day. It arrives lighter, not empty, just unburdened. The Stoic approach is not about becoming detached from life. It is about becoming detached from unnecessary weight. Life remains complex, uncertain, but your relationship to it becomes calmer. You act where action matters. You release where it does not. And in that balance, the mind finds a steadier rhythm. Some things will always affect you. That is part of being human. But not everything that affects you belongs to you. Understanding this is one of the most freeing realizations a person can have. Lesson 8. Worry is often habit, not intuition. Worry often presents itself as wisdom. It speaks with urgency. It insists. It tells you that it is trying to protect you. The mind says, "If I think about this enough, I'll be ready. If I stay alert, I won't be caught off guard. If I worry now, I'll suffer less later." This sounds reasonable, but over time, something becomes clear. Most worry does not come from insight. It comes from repetition. It is not intuition speaking, it is habit. The mind learns patterns quickly. If worrying once feels useful, it tries it again. If worrying creates a sense of control, even briefly, the mind repeats it. Soon, worry becomes automatic. It appears before you choose it. It runs in the background. It fills quiet moments without invitation. This is why worry feels convincing. It feels familiar. Familiarity is often mistaken for truth. The Stoic thinkers noticed this long ago. They observed that the mind confuses movement with meaning. If a thought keeps returning, the mind assumes it must be important. But importance is not measured by frequency. Some thoughts return simply because they have been practiced. Consider how a person learns a habit. They check their phone once, and it relieves boredom. They check again and again. Soon, the hand reaches for the phone without conscious decision. Worry works the same way. A concern appears. The mind engages. There is a sense of doing something. That sense becomes addictive, not because it feels good, but because it feels active. You may notice this in moments of silence. Nothing is wrong, nothing urgent is happening. And yet, the mind searches. It brings up a familiar worry. Not because new information has appeared, but because the habit needs stimulation. This is not intuition. Intuition is quiet. It arrives without tension. It does not repeat itself endlessly. Worry is noisy. It circles. It demands attention again and again. The Stoics trusted intuition, but they were suspicious of repetitive fear. They believed that wisdom does not shout. If something truly requires action, clarity accompanies it. When a thought returns without clarity, it is often habit seeking reassurance. This is an important distinction. Many people exhaust themselves by treating every worried thought as a signal. They respond to all of them. They analyze. They prepare. But preparation without direction becomes strain. You can see this in everyday situations. A person worries about money late at night. not because a decision must be made now, but because worry has become routine. Another person worries about health, scanning the body for signs, not because something has changed, but because attention has learned to look for danger. In both cases, the worry feels meaningful, but nothing new is being learned. The mind is simply repeating a pattern. This is where awareness matters. The Stoic approach is not to suppress worry. It is to observe it, to notice its tone, its urgency, its lack of clarity, and to ask quietly, is this information or is this habit? Often the answer becomes obvious. Habit has a certain flavor. It feels restless, insistent, unfinished. Intuition feels different. It is brief, grounded. It does not require constant attention. Recognizing this difference reduces mental noise. You stop treating every thought as a message. Some thoughts are just echoes, echoes of past fears, past experiences, past attempts to feel safe. They do not need a response. Responding to them keeps the habit alive. The Stoics believe that attention is power. What you give attention to grows stronger. When you stop feeding a habit, it weakens. This does not happen instantly. Habits resist change. They test whether you will return to them. A worried thought may appear again simply because it is used to being noticed. You do not need to argue with it. You do not need to reassure it. You only need to recognize it. This is familiar. This is not new. That recognition alone changes the dynamic. The thought loses some of its urgency. It no longer feels like a command. Over time, the space between worries grows. Not because life becomes simpler, but because the mind stops repeating unnecessary loops. This creates relief. Not dramatic relief, but steady relief. The kind that comes when the mind stops exhausting itself. Understanding that worry is often habit restores trust in your own judgment. You realize that not every thought deserves your energy. That silence is not neglect. That rest is not ignorance. The Stoics believe that a calm mind is not an empty mind. It is a selective one. It chooses where to engage. It chooses where to wait. This selectivity is strength. When worry is no longer mistaken for intuition, the night changes. The mind does not feel compelled to fill every quiet moment. Silence becomes less threatening. You begin to notice that many worries fade when they are not entertained. Not because they were solved, but because they were never essential. This does not mean real problems disappear. It means they stop being multiplied. You face what is real with more clarity, and you stop fighting ghosts. This is not optimism. It is discipline, the discipline of attention. And it is one of the most practical forms of Stoic wisdom, not because it removes difficulty, but because it removes unnecessary strain. Worry will still appear from time to time. That is human. But it no longer runs the mind. It becomes one signal among many, not the loudest voice in the room. And when worry loses that power, space returns. Space for rest. Space for clarity. Space for quieter thoughts to emerge. That space is not something you create. It appears when habit is no longer mistaken for truth. Lesson 9. Other people's reactions are not yours to manage. One of the heaviest things the mind carries is other people's reactions. Not what they do, but how they respond. Their tone, their silence, their disappointment, their approval. The mind watches these signals closely. It tries to interpret them, to adjust to them, to prevent negative outcomes. Often without realizing it, you begin to manage not just your actions, but how others might feel about them. This feels responsible. It feels considerate, but it comes at a cost. You cannot control how another person reacts, and trying to do so quietly exhausts the mind. The Stoic thinkers were very clear on this point. They believed that while you are responsible for your intentions and actions, you are not responsible for how they are received. This distinction is simple, yet difficult to live. Because humans are social. We care about being understood, about being accepted, about avoiding conflict. So the mind tries to stay ahead. It replays conversations, wonders if something was misunderstood, imagines how words landed. Not because action is possible now, but because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. You may recognize this pattern. After a conversation, you think about what you said. You wonder if your tone was right, if you said too much, if you should have said less. The conversation is over. The other person has moved on, but your mind stays there. This is not reflection. It is management. And management without influence creates strain. The Stoics observed that much suffering comes from wanting outcomes that depend on others. You can speak honestly and still be misunderstood. You can act with care and still be judged. These outcomes do not cancel your effort. They simply exist outside your control. When the mind refuses to accept this, it tries to compensate. It anticipates reactions. It adjusts behavior excessively. It sacrifices clarity for approval. Over time, this creates inner tension. You may feel like you are constantly performing, constantly editing yourself, not because you are dishonest, but because you are afraid of causing discomfort. This fear keeps the mind alert. It scans for signs of disapproval. It magnifies small reactions. A delayed response becomes a rejection. A short message becomes a problem. Most of the time, these interpretations are guesses, but the mind treats them as facts. This is where exhaustion grows. You are not tired from what you did. You are tired from what you are imagining. The Stoic approach here is not to become indifferent. It is to become grounded. They believe that integrity matters more than perception. If your intention was honest, if your action was thoughtful, your responsibility ends there. The reaction belongs to the other person. This does not mean you ignore feedback. It means you do not internalize every response. There is a difference. Feedback informs. Internalization burdens. You may notice moments when this distinction becomes clear. You express a boundary and someone reacts poorly. Your mind immediately wants to fix it, to explain more, to soften the message, to take responsibility for their discomfort. But discomfort is not harm, and someone else's emotional response is not always a sign that you did something wrong. The Stoics believed that peace comes when a person stops arguing with what they cannot control. Other people's reactions are part of that category. They arise from their history, their expectations, their state of mind. You cannot manage those from the outside. Trying to do so keeps you mentally entangled. This entanglement shows up most clearly at night. During the day, you move on, you stay busy. At night, the mind returns to unresolved reactions. It replays them. It imagines alternate outcomes, not because solutions are available, but because the mind believes it failed in its duty. But the duty was misunderstood. Your duty is to act with clarity and honesty, not to guarantee comfort. This realization is difficult, especially for people who value harmony. But harmony cannot be forced. It emerges when people are allowed to have their own responses. When you stop managing reactions, something changes internally. You feel lighter, not because conflict disappears, but because you are no longer carrying it alone. You may notice that conversations feel cleaner. You speak more directly. You listen more calmly, not because you care less, but because you trust your intentions more. The Stoics believed that self-respect grows when you stop outsourcing your peace. Peace that depends on approval is fragile. Peace that comes from alignment is stable. This does not mean becoming rigid. It means becoming centered. You still adjust when necessary. You still learn. But you stop rehearsing conversations that are already finished. You stop trying to rewrite reactions you cannot change. This creates mental space. Space that was previously filled with speculation and self-doubt. That space does not remain empty. It fills with calm. Not a dramatic calm, but a steady one. The kind that allows you to rest without replaying every interaction. The kind that allows you to sleep without managing other people's emotions. Understanding that reactions are not yours to manage is one of the most freeing insights a person can have. It does not isolate you. It stabilizes you. You remain connected, but no longer entangled. And in that balance, the mind finally learns how to set certain things down. Lesson 10. The future feels urgent only when you're tired. The future has a strange way of changing shape at night. During the day, it feels distant, abstract, something you will deal with later. But when you are tired, the future moves closer. It presses in. Questions that felt manageable earlier now feel heavy. What if things don't work out? What if this decision was wrong? What if something goes wrong tomorrow? Nothing new has happened. No information has changed. Only your energy has. A tired mind does not experience time the same way. It loses distance. Tomorrow feels immediate. Next week feels urgent. The unknown feels threatening. This is not intuition. It is fatigue. The Stoic thinkers were attentive to this shift. They understood that the mind's judgment is affected by its condition. A rested mind sees possibilities. A tired mind sees danger. This is why they emphasized timing. They believed that wisdom includes knowing when not to think about certain things. Not because those things don't matter, but because the mind is not in the right state to engage with them. The future does not become more real at night. Your capacity to face it simply becomes weaker. You may recognize this pattern. You lie awake thinking about something that lies ahead. A meeting, a decision, a change you cannot control. You go over it repeatedly, hoping to feel prepared. But preparation never arrives. Instead, anxiety grows. This is because preparation requires clarity, and clarity does not exist when the mind is exhausted. The Stoics did not believe in constant anticipation. They believed in presence. Not presence as a slogan, but as a practical discipline. They observed that the future cannot be handled with the same mental tools as the present. You can plan during the day. You can decide during the day. At night, the same thinking turns unproductive. It creates urgency without direction. The mind confuses urgency with importance. Something feels urgent, so it assumes it must be addressed now. But urgency is often a signal of low energy, not high priority. This distinction is critical. Many people exhaust themselves by responding to urgency instead of relevance. They think, if it feels urgent, I must act. But urgency without action is a trap. It keeps the mind spinning without producing results. Consider someone worrying about finances late at night. The numbers do not change. No payment can be made. No plan can be executed. And yet, the mind insists. It imagines scenarios. It predicts outcomes. It searches for certainty. Not because certainty is available, but because the tired mind hates uncertainty. This is not problem solving. It is pressure disguised as responsibility. The Stoics understood that the future must be met with preparation, not obsession. Preparation happens when the mind is clear. Obsession happens when the mind is tired. This is why they valued rest. Rest was not indulgence. It was strategy. They knew that a calm mind tomorrow is more valuable than anxious thinking tonight. When this is understood, the relationship to the future changes. You stop trying to resolve tomorrow with tonight's limited energy. You begin to trust timing. This trust is not naive, it is realistic. You recognize that you will have more information later, more strength, more clarity. The future does not need to be carried every moment. It can wait. The mind resists this idea at first. It fears that if it stops thinking, it will lose control. But control over the future is always partial. Thinking more does not increase it. It only increases fatigue. You may notice moments when you allow the future to step back slightly. Not disappear, just move out of the center. In those moments, the present becomes lighter. The body relaxes. Breathing changes. Not because the future vanished, but because it stopped demanding attention. The Stoic approach here is quiet acceptance. They did not deny that the future matters. They denied that it belongs to the present moment. They believed that the present is where action happens. The future is where results appear. Mixing the two creates confusion. At night, the present does not ask for decisions. It asks for recovery. Recovery restores the mind's ability to face what comes next. When you respect this rhythm, fatigue decreases. Not because life becomes easier, but because you stop asking the mind to do tomorrow's work tonight. This does not mean ignoring responsibilities. It means placing them in the right time. The future will still be there when you wake up. It will not punish you for resting. In fact, it will meet you with more clarity because you allowed the mind to reset. Understanding that the future feels urgent only when you're tired changes how you respond to nighttime thinking. You no longer treat urgency as a command. You see it for what it is, a signal to stop. This is not avoidance. It is wisdom. The Stoics believed that strength is measured not by how much you can carry, but by how well you choose when to carry it. Tonight, the future does not need you. It will wait. And when morning comes, you will be better equipped to meet it. Lesson 11. Uncertainty is not a threat. Uncertainty often feels dangerous. Not because something bad is happening, but because something is unknown. The mind has a strong preference for clarity. It wants clear answers, clear timelines, clear outcomes. When these are missing, the mind reacts. It tightens, it scans, it imagines. Uncertainty creates a sense of vulnerability, and the mind once again reaches for control. It tells itself that if it could just know more, if it could predict what's coming, it would finally relax. But knowing more does not always bring calm. Often, it brings more questions. The Stoic thinkers understood this tension well. They lived in a world where certainty was rare. Illness, political change, loss, and exile were common. They did not treat uncertainty as an enemy. They treated it as a condition of life. This distinction matters. When uncertainty is framed as a threat, the mind stays in defense mode. When it is framed as a condition, the mind adapts. Much of modern anxiety comes not from danger itself, but from the expectation of certainty. We want guarantees. We want reassurance. But life does not operate that way, and fighting this reality creates strain. You may notice this in your own thinking. You want to know how something will turn out before taking the next step. You want certainty before resting. So the mind keeps asking questions that have no answers yet. What if this doesn't work? What if I chose wrong? What if something changes? These questions feel responsible, but they rarely lead anywhere. They simply keep the mind alert. The Stoics believe that calm comes not from eliminating uncertainty, but from changing your relationship to it. They did not ask, "How can I remove uncertainty?" They asked, "How can I remain steady within it?" This is a powerful shift. Uncertainty does not require immediate action. It requires tolerance. Tolerance is not passive. It is a form of strength. It means allowing the unknown to exist without trying to force clarity. This does not mean ignoring reality. It means not demanding more from it than it can give. You may have experienced moments when uncertainty resolved itself without your interference. A situation clarified over time. A decision became obvious later. A fear faded once it was no longer fed. In those moments you realized that constant vigilance was never necessary. The mind had simply assumed it was. Uncertainty feels threatening because the mind equates it with loss of control. But control was never complete to begin with. The Stoics were honest about this. They believed that peace begins when you stop asking life for guarantees. Guarantees create dependency. Resilience creates freedom. A resilient mind does not need certainty to function. It needs flexibility. Flexibility allows you to respond as things unfold. It keeps you grounded in the present instead of trapped in imagined futures. This is why uncertainty often feels heavier at night. The mind is tired. Its flexibility is reduced. So uncertainty feels more rigid, more overwhelming. But the uncertainty itself has not changed. Only your capacity to hold it has. Recognizing this reduces fear. You stop treating uncertainty as a sign that something is wrong. You see it as neutral, neither good nor bad, just unfinished. The Stoics believe that unfinished things do not require constant attention. They require patience. Patience allows time to do its work. You may notice moments when you stop pressing for answers, when you allow a situation to remain open. In those moments, the mind softens, not because the answer arrived, but because the demand stopped. This softening is important. It shows that calm does not depend on certainty. It depends on acceptance. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means realism. You acknowledge what you know and what you do not. You act where you can and wait where you must. This balance is central to Stoic thought, not as a philosophy lesson, but as a practical way of living. Uncertainty will always be part of life. Trying to remove it only creates tension. Learning to live alongside it creates stability. When you stop treating uncertainty as a threat, the mind no longer feels under attack. It relaxes its defenses. Thoughts slow down. Urgency fades. You become more present, not because the future disappeared, but because it stopped demanding control. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop fighting reality. The Stoics believed that peace comes when a person aligns with how life actually works, not with how they wish it worked. Life unfolds gradually. Clarity arrives in stages. Uncertainty is part of that process. When you allow it, instead of resisting it, you save energy. That energy returns as clarity later. Tonight, uncertainty does not need to be resolved. It does not require your effort. It simply needs to be allowed. And when it is allowed, it loses much of its power, not because it vanished, but because you stop treating it as something to defeat. That understanding changes how the mind rests, and it prepares you quietly to face whatever comes next with more steadiness than control ever could. Lesson 12. Letting go is an inner decision, not an action. Most people think letting go is something you do. They imagine it as an effort, a technique, a deliberate act. They try to relax. They try to stop thinking. They try to release control. And when it doesn't work, they feel frustrated. But letting go is not an action. It is a decision, not a loud one, not a dramatic one. A quiet shift inside. The Stoic thinkers understood this distinction deeply. They did not teach letting go as a behavior. They understood it as a change in relationship. You don't let go by pushing something away. You let go by no longer holding it the same way. This is why forcing calm rarely works. Effort creates tension. Tension keeps the mind engaged. Letting go happens when effort ends. You may have noticed this before, even if you didn't name it. A moment when you were thinking intensely about a problem, and then, without deciding to, your attention moved elsewhere. The problem didn't disappear, but it lost its grip. That shift did not come from trying harder. It came from stopping. This is the inner decision. Not, I must let this go, but I don't need to carry this right now. That difference is subtle, but powerful. The mind often resists this idea. It believes that if it stops holding something, it is abandoning responsibility. So it keeps the tension alive. But tension is not responsibility. The Stoics were clear about this. They believed that a person can remain committed without remaining tense. Commitment lives in values. Tension lives in fear. You can care about an outcome without gripping it constantly. Letting go does not require forgetting. It requires release of pressure. This is why it feels internal. Nothing changes on the outside at first. The situation remains the same. The uncertainty remains. But something changes in how the mind relates to it. You stop leaning forward mentally. You stop rehearsing. You stop checking the same thought for reassurance. This decision often happens quietly, almost without words. A recognition appears. There is nothing more I can add right now. This is not resignation. It is honesty. The Stoics believe that peace comes when effort matches reality. When effort exceeds reality, strain appears. Letting go corrects that imbalance. You may see this in moments of exhaustion. A person worries for hours and eventually feels too tired to continue. At that point, the mind drops the issue. Not because it was solved, but because effort ended. And strangely, relief follows. Not because the problem disappeared, but because the mind stopped pushing against it. This reveals an important truth. Relief is not created by solving everything. It is created by ending unnecessary effort. The Stoics did not glorify struggle. They valued endurance, but only where endurance mattered. They believed that wasting effort was a form of ignorance. Letting go, for them, was a sign of understanding. Understanding that not everything requires your attention at once. Understanding that timing matters. Understanding that rest is part of discipline. This reframes letting go completely. It is not weakness. It is precision. You choose where your energy goes. You do not allow it to leak into every thought. This choice does not need to be announced. It does not need to be justified. It happens internally. You may notice it as a slight softening. The body relaxes a little. Breathing changes. Thoughts still appear, but they do not demand engagement. You are aware of them, but you are not inside them. This distance is not coldness. It is clarity. The Stoics believe that clarity arises when the mind stops arguing with reality. Letting go is not giving up on life. It is giving up on the illusion of total control. That illusion creates constant pressure. Releasing it restores balance. You do not need to let go forever. You do not need to let go of everything. You only need to let go of what cannot be handled right now. This makes letting go practical. It becomes situational, not absolute. You can return to a problem later with more energy. You can engage again when conditions change. Letting go is reversible. Control, once exhausted, is not. This is why letting go feels safer than the mind expects. It does not erase your values. It preserves them. The Stoics believe that a calm mind is more capable than a strained one. Letting go is how calm returns, not through force, through decision. An inner decision to stop pushing where pushing no longer helps. This decision does not require belief. It requires observation. You observe the effort, you observe the fatigue, and you choose to stop adding to it. That choice is quiet, almost invisible, but its effect is real. The mind regains space, the body eases. You do not feel triumphant, you feel lighter. That lightness is not the result of action, it is the result of release. And release is not something you do, it is something you allow. When you understand this, letting go stops feeling like a task. It becomes a natural response to unnecessary strain. That understanding alone changes how the mind behaves, not just at night, but everywhere. Lesson 13. Thinking more does not mean thinking better. The mind often believes that more thinking equals better thinking. When something feels unresolved, the instinct is to stay with it longer, to analyze it from different angles, to replay it, to search for the missing piece. This feels productive, but thinking has limits. After a certain point, thinking stops adding clarity and starts creating noise. The Stoic thinkers were keen observers of this pattern. They noticed that judgment weakens when the mind is overloaded. A mind that never pauses loses its ability to see clearly. This is why more thinking does not always lead to better decisions. Sometimes it leads to confusion. You may recognize this experience. You think about a problem repeatedly, expecting insight. Instead, the problem feels heavier. You begin to doubt yourself. Options blur. Simple choices feel complicated. Nothing has changed externally. The only thing that has changed is the state of your mind. Thinking requires energy. When that energy is depleted, thinking becomes circular. The same ideas repeat. The same concerns resurface. This repetition gives the illusion of progress, but it produces none. The Stoics understood that clarity depends on condition. A calm mind sees relationships between things. A tired mind fixates on details. This fixation feels intense, but intensity is not insight. It is strain. You may notice that your best ideas rarely appear when you are forcing them. They arrive unexpectedly, in moments of rest, during a walk, after sleep. This is not coincidence. When the mind is relaxed, it connects information naturally. When the mind is tense, it narrows. The Stoics valued this natural clarity. They did not encourage constant reflection. They encouraged measured reflection. They believed that reflection without rest turns into rumination. Rumination is not thinking forward. It is thinking in place. You can see this difference in how the mind behaves late at night. A question appears. You engage with it. Instead of resolution, urgency increases. The thought demands more attention, not because it is useful, but because the mind is tired. Fatigue lowers the threshold for urgency. Everything feels important when energy is low. This is why thinking late at night often feels intense and unproductive. The Stoics were practical about this. They believed that the timing of thought matters as much as its content. Some thoughts are better handled later, not avoided, postponed. Postponement is not denial, it is strategy. You may have experienced this yourself. You struggled with a decision one evening, unable to choose. The next morning, the answer felt obvious. The problem did not change. You did. Your mind had rested. This shows something important. Clarity is not always found by adding more thought. It is often found by removing pressure. The mind resists this idea. It believes that stopping means losing control. But control gained through exhaustion is unreliable. A tired mind is easily convinced by fear. It magnifies risks. It underestimates resilience. This distortion makes thinking less accurate, not more. The Stoics believed that wisdom includes restraint. Restraint in speech, restraint in reaction, restraint in thought. They understood that just because a thought appears does not mean it deserves attention. Attention is a choice. When you give attention selectively, thinking improves. When you give attention indiscriminately, thinking deteriorates. This is a subtle discipline. It does not require suppressing thoughts. It requires choosing not to follow all of them. You may notice moments when a thought arises and you feel the urge to continue it. The Stoic response is not to stop the thought, but to stop investing in it, to let it exist without expanding it. This reduces mental clutter. Over time, the mind learns that not every thought needs completion. This learning is important. Completion is not always possible. Some questions require time. Some answers are not available yet. Trying to force completion creates frustration. The Stoics accepted incompleteness. They believed that patience is part of intelligence. An incomplete thought is not a failure. It is an unfinished process. Allowing it to remain unfinished preserves energy. This preservation matters. When energy is conserved, thinking becomes sharper when it resumes. You may notice that when you stop forcing thought, a sense of relief appears. Not relief because the issue is solved, but relief because the mind is no longer pushing. That relief is a signal. It tells you that effort has exceeded usefulness. Listening to this signal is a form of wisdom. The Stoics believed that a person who knows when to stop thinking often thinks better overall. They do not chase every idea. They wait. Waiting is not inactivity, it is preparation. The mind resets, perspective returns. This is why restraint in thinking is not limitation, it is refinement. You are not reducing your intelligence by thinking less. You are improving its quality. When you understand this, your relationship with thought changes. You no longer equate effort with effectiveness. You become more patient with uncertainty, more comfortable with silence. This comfort does not dull the mind. It sharpens it. Because clarity does not come from pressure. It comes from space. And space is created not by thinking more, but by knowing when to stop. This understanding quietly reshapes how the mind operates. You begin to trust that clarity will return when conditions are right. You stop forcing insight from fatigue. That trust is not passive. It is earned. And it is one of the most practical lessons Stoic thought offers to a modern, overworked mind. Lesson 14. Mental rest is not avoidance. Many people confuse rest with avoidance. They believe that if they stop thinking about a problem, they are running away from it. So they stay mentally engaged. They keep reviewing, planning, worrying. Not because it helps, but because stopping feels irresponsible. This belief keeps the mind tense. The Stoic thinkers saw this confusion clearly. They understood that avoidance means refusing to face reality, while rest means choosing the right moment to engage with it. These are not the same. Mental rest does not deny problems. It places them where they belong. You can acknowledge a situation without staying inside it continuously. This distinction is subtle but essential. Consider how the body works. If a muscle is used constantly without pause, it weakens. Rest does not mean the muscle is abandoned. It means it is allowed to recover. The mind works the same way. Continuous thinking does not strengthen judgment. It wears it down. Yet many people fear that if they rest mentally, they will lose momentum. They tell themselves, if I stop thinking, I'll forget. If I relax, I'll miss something important. But rest does not erase awareness. It restores it. The Stoics believed that the mind needs intervals. They did not admire constant mental activity. They admired steadiness. Steadiness comes from balance, not from pressure. You may notice this in everyday life. A person takes a break from a difficult decision. They step away, intentionally. Later, when they return, the decision feels clearer. Nothing changed externally. Time passed. What changed was the mind's condition. Rest removed the noise. This is not avoidance. It is strategic distance. Avoidance hides. Rest observes from afar. Avoidance creates denial. Rest creates perspective. The mind resists this idea because it equates effort with seriousness. But seriousness does not require constant attention. In fact, constant attention often reduces seriousness. It creates impatience. You may recognize moments when thinking too much made a problem feel heavier. You felt stuck, irritable, less capable. This is a sign that rest was needed, not more thought. The Stoics understood that the quality of attention matters. They believed that attention given at the wrong time is wasted. There are moments for action and moments for pause. Confusing these moments creates inner conflict. Mental rest is choosing pause intentionally. It is not ignoring responsibility. It is respecting limits, limits of energy, limits of clarity. This respect is a form of discipline. You may feel discomfort when you first allow yourself to rest mentally. The mind may protest. It may bring up the problem again, as if to test whether you are serious about letting go. This is normal. Habits resist change. Rest does not silence thoughts immediately. It changes how you respond to them. Instead of engaging, you notice. Instead of analyzing, you allow. This allowance feels unfamiliar at first, but it creates space. Space is where perspective forms. The Stoics believe that perspective is more valuable than constant analysis. Perspective allows you to see what truly matters, what can wait, what requires action. Avoidance refuses to see. Rest prepares to see better. This is why rest often leads to insight, not because you searched for it, but because you stopped interfering. You may notice that after mental rest, your response to a problem is calmer. You are less reactive, less urgent. This calm does not mean the problem disappeared. It means your relationship to it improved. This improvement is practical. Decisions made from rest are often simpler and more accurate. This is why the Stoics valued composure. They believed that a composed mind responds more wisely than a strained one. They did not glorify struggle for its own sake. They believed struggle should serve a purpose. Mental rest ensures that effort is used wisely. You are not betraying your responsibilities by resting. You are honoring them. Because a rested mind can carry responsibility without collapsing. The fear that rest equals avoidance comes from mistrust. Mistrust in time, mistrust in yourself. The Stoics believe that trust is part of wisdom. Trust that clarity will return. Trust that problems do not require constant supervision. This trust does not mean passivity. It means patience. Patience allows situations to unfold. It allows information to appear. Avoidance blocks this process. Rest supports it. When you allow mental rest, you stop demanding immediate resolution. This demand is often the source of pressure. Pressure clouds judgment. Removing pressure restores it. The difference may be subtle, but its effects accumulate. Over time, you notice that the mind no longer panics at silence. It no longer feels compelled to fill every gap with thought. This creates stability. Stability is not rigidity. It is resilience. The Stoics believe that resilience comes from alignment with reality. Reality unfolds at its own pace. Mental rest respects that pace. Avoidance fights it. Understanding this difference changes how you treat your own mind. You stop accusing yourself of being lazy or careless when you rest. You recognize rest as a necessary part of strength. This recognition reduces inner conflict. The mind no longer fights itself. That alone saves energy. Mental rest is not escape. It is preparation. It prepares the mind to meet reality with clarity instead of exhaustion. And clarity, more than effort, is what allows you to respond well to whatever comes next. Lesson 15. Thoughts do not require a response. Not every thought is a question. Not every thought is a warning. Not every thought is asking for action. Yet the mind often treats thoughts as if they demand a reply. A thought appears, and attention follows it automatically. It feels natural to respond, to explain, to correct, to reassure. But responding is a choice, not a requirement. The Stoic thinkers were careful observers of this habit. They noticed that the mind exhausts itself by answering thoughts that never needed engagement. They understood that a thought is not an order. It is an event, like a sound in the distance, like a cloud passing through the sky. It appears and it passes, unless it is fed. Many people do not realize how much energy is spent responding to thoughts. A concern arises, and the mind builds an argument. A memory surfaces, and the mind replays it. A fear appears, and the mind prepares defenses. None of this is demanded by reality in that moment. It is demanded by habit. You may notice this most clearly when nothing external is happening. You are sitting quietly. There is no decision to make. And yet, the mind fills the space. It brings up unfinished business. It anticipates conversations. It creates scenarios. The moment a thought appears, the reflex is to engage. But engagement is optional. The Stoics believe that freedom begins when you recognize this option. They did not attempt to stop thoughts. They simply refused to follow all of them. This refusal was not aggressive. It was calm. They understood that attention is a form of consent. When you give attention to a thought, you give it momentum. When you do not, it fades on its own. This does not require discipline in the harsh sense. It requires recognition. Recognition that a thought is just a thought, not a command, not a prediction, not a truth. You may have experienced moments when you did not respond to a thought. Perhaps you were absorbed in something else, and a worry passed without engagement. Later, you realized you forgot about it. Nothing bad happened. The thought simply lost relevance when it lost attention. This reveals something important. Thoughts often feel powerful only because they are answered. Without response, many of them dissolve. The mind resists this idea. It fears that silence equals neglect. It believes that if it does not respond, something important will be missed. But importance does not require constant response. True signals repeat with clarity, not with urgency. The Stoics trusted this distinction. They believed that what truly matters will return calmly when the mind is ready. Urgent, repetitive thoughts are often noise, not guidance. Responding to noise creates fatigue. You may notice that after long periods of mental engagement, you feel drained. Not because anything difficult happened, but because you were constantly reacting. Reaction without necessity is one of the fastest ways to exhaust the mind. The Stoics valued restraint. Restraint in speech, restraint in action, restraint in thought. They believed that restraint preserves strength. When you stop responding automatically, energy returns. Not instantly, but steadily. You may notice this when you allow a thought to pass. At first, there is discomfort. The mind feels unfinished. It wants closure. But if you wait, the discomfort softens. The thought loses urgency. Another thought appears, and you notice that it too does not require response. This creates a shift. You are no longer inside the stream of thought. You are observing it. This observation is not detachment from life. It is detachment from unnecessary effort. The Stoics did not aim to silence the mind. They aimed to reduce reactivity. Reactivity creates inner chaos. Observation creates stability. This does not mean you never respond. Some thoughts require action. Some require reflection. But many do not. Learning the difference is a form of wisdom. You may notice how this applies to emotional thoughts. A feeling arises, and the mind immediately tries to explain it. Why am I feeling this? What does it mean? This explanation often intensifies the feeling. Not because understanding is wrong, but because timing matters. Feelings, like thoughts, do not always need interpretation. Sometimes they need space. The Stoics understood that emotions are signals, not instructions. They can be felt without being analyzed immediately. This reduces their intensity. When you stop responding to every thought, you stop amplifying them. Amplification is what creates overwhelm. Without amplification, thoughts become lighter. They still appear, but they do not dominate. This is not indifference. It is discernment. Discernment allows you to choose where to invest energy. Energy conserved this way returns as clarity. You become less reactive, more grounded. The mind begins to trust that silence is safe, that nothing terrible happens when a thought is not answered. This trust changes how thinking feels. Thoughts slow down. They become less insistent. Not because you force them to stop, but because they no longer receive constant reinforcement. The Stoics believe that peace comes when a person stops arguing with their own mind. Arguing requires response. Peace requires space. This space does not isolate you from reality. It connects you to it more accurately. You see situations as they are, not as your thoughts describe them. This accuracy improves judgment. It allows you to act when action is needed and rest when it is not. Understanding that thoughts do not require a response is a turning point. It reduces mental pressure without removing intelligence. You remain capable, you remain aware, but you stop being captive to every passing idea. This does not make life simpler, it makes the mind quieter. And a quieter mind handles complexity better than one that is constantly responding. The Stoics believe that inner freedom begins with this realization. Not every thought deserves your time. Some thoughts are simply passing through. Let them pass. They will take their urgency with them. Lesson 16. Attention is what keeps worry alive. Worry does not survive on its own. It needs something to feed it. That something is attention. Without attention, worry weakens. With attention, it grows. This is not theory. It is observation. The Stoic thinkers were deeply aware of this dynamic. They noticed that thoughts gain strength not because they are true, but because they are entertained. The mind often believes that by paying attention to worry, it is being careful. But care and attention are not the same. Attention is energy, and energy, once given, is not neutral. You may notice how quickly worry expands once it becomes the focus. A small concern appears. You turn toward it. Within minutes, it connects to other worries. Past mistakes, future fears. Nothing new has happened. Only attention has moved. This movement creates momentum. The Stoics understood that the mind cannot attend to everything equally. Whatever receives focus becomes central. Whatever is ignored fades. This does not mean ignoring reality. It means choosing where reality is examined. Worry feels compelling because it demands attention urgently. It speaks loudly. It insists. The mind often mistakes volume for importance. But volume is not truth. Urgency is not relevance. Worry uses urgency to secure attention. Once it has it, it multiplies. You may see this in quiet moments. You sit still. Nothing is wrong. Then a thought appears. What if something goes wrong? If you follow it, the mind begins to search. What exactly could go wrong? When? How bad would it be? Each question adds fuel. Soon, the original thought is no longer small. It feels overwhelming. This is not because the situation changed. It is because attention stayed. The Stoics believed that freedom begins when you reclaim attention. They did not try to eliminate worry directly. They removed its food. They understood that attention can be withdrawn without conflict, not pushed away, not suppressed, simply redirected. This redirection does not require effort. It requires noticing that worry exists, noticing that attention is attached, and gently allowing attention to move. You may have experienced this without naming it. A worry occupies your mind. Then something else captures your attention. A sound, a task, a physical sensation. For a moment, the worry disappears. Nothing was solved. Nothing was explained. Attention simply moved. This shows something important. Worry does not control attention. Attention controls worry. The Stoics valued this insight. They believed that mastery of attention is more important than mastery of circumstances. Circumstances change. Attention is available now. Many people feel trapped by worry because they believe it must be addressed. But not all worries require engagement. Some are habits, some are echoes. Feeding them gives them life. Not feeding them lets them weaken. This does not happen instantly. Worry will test whether it can regain attention. It may return repeatedly. This is not failure. It is habit adjusting. Each time attention is not given, the habit loses strength. Over time, worry becomes quieter, not absent, just less dominant. The Stoics believed that peace comes when the mind stops over-investing in fear. Fear is part of life. So is uncertainty. But constant attention to fear distorts perception. It makes life feel more dangerous than it is. Reducing attention restores proportion. Problems return to their actual size. They no longer fill the entire mental space. This creates relief, not because problems disappeared, but because they stopped occupying everything. You may notice that when attention is freed, other things become visible. Neutral moments, small comforts, physical sensations. These were always present, but attention was elsewhere. The Stoics believed that presence is a natural antidote to worry. Not forced presence, simple presence. Attention anchored in what is real now has less space for imagined threats. This does not mean denying the future. It means not living there constantly. You can prepare without worrying. You can plan without feeding fear. Preparation uses attention briefly and purposefully. Worry uses it endlessly. Learning the difference changes how the mind feels. When attention is no longer captured automatically, you regain choice. You choose where to look. This choice is subtle. It may feel insignificant at first, but its effects accumulate. A little less attention given to worry today means less worry tomorrow. The mind learns patterns. When it learns that worry does not receive attention, it produces less of it. This is not suppression, it is conditioning. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology. They observed their own minds carefully. They saw that what is practiced grows. Attention is practice. When you practice worry, worry improves. When you practice presence, presence improves. This does not require perfection. It requires consistency. Small shifts in attention, repeated, reshape mental habits. You may notice moments when worry appears and you do nothing. You don't engage. You don't argue. You simply let attention rest elsewhere. In those moments, the mind feels lighter, not because worry vanished forever, but because it lost its grip. This lightness is not fragile. it grows stronger with use. The Stoics believed that inner stability comes from understanding how the mind works. Attention is one of its central mechanisms. When you stop feeding worry with attention, you do not become careless. You become accurate. You see what truly deserves focus and what does not. This accuracy restores calm, not dramatic calm, sustainable calm, the kind that allows you to move through life without carrying unnecessary fear. Understanding that attention keeps worry alive gives you power. Not power over life, but power over where your mind lives. And where your mind lives shapes everything else. Lesson 17. Calm appears when effort leaves. Calm is often misunderstood. Many people think calm is something to achieve, something to reach through discipline or control. They try to calm themselves. They tell the mind to slow down. They force relaxation. But calm does not respond to force. It appears when effort leaves. This is why calm is elusive to those who chase it. The Stoic thinkers noticed this long ago. They understood that calm is not a product of control, but the absence of unnecessary struggle. When the mind stops pushing, calm returns naturally. Effort has a role in life. It is necessary for action, for growth, for change. But effort applied where it no longer helps creates tension, and tension blocks calm. You may recognize this in simple moments. You try to fall asleep by telling yourself to sleep. You try to relax by focusing intensely on relaxation. The harder you try, the further calm moves away. This is not because you are doing something wrong. It is because calm cannot coexist with effort. Effort activates the mind. Calm requires release. The Stoics did not aim to eliminate effort entirely. They aimed to place it correctly. They believed that wisdom lies in knowing when effort is useful and when it becomes harmful. Much of inner tension comes from effort continuing past its moment. The mind keeps working even when there is nothing left to do. This creates a state of readiness without purpose. You may feel this as restlessness, a sense that you should be doing something even when there is nothing to do. This restlessness is effort without direction. It is exhausting. The Stoics believe that calm appears when the mind stops demanding results. Results belong to action. Calm belongs to acceptance. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means recognition. You recognize that the moment does not require effort. This recognition allows effort to dissolve. Calm follows naturally. You may notice this after a long day. You stop trying to organize your thoughts. You stop reviewing events. For a brief moment, you simply exist. In that moment, calm appears, not because anything was solved, but because effort stopped. This reveals something important. Calm is not created, it is uncovered. It was always there, hidden beneath activity. The Stoics believed that nature tends toward balance. The mind, when left alone, moves toward stillness. But it must be allowed. Constant effort interferes with this process. This is why people who strive constantly often feel tense even in peaceful settings. The environment is calm. The mind is not. The problem is not the environment. It is the effort carried inside. Effort becomes habitual. The mind forgets how to stop. It stays alert, even when no alertness is required. This habit is reinforced by modern life. Speed, urgency, constant stimulation. The Stoics lived in difficult times too. but they practiced stepping out of effort deliberately. They used reflection not to solve everything, but to recognize when enough was enough. They understood that calm is a signal. It signals that effort has aligned with reality. When effort exceeds reality, calm disappears. This alignment is subtle. It does not require analysis. It requires awareness. You notice the tension. You notice the push. And instead of adding more effort, you remove some. This removal may feel uncomfortable at first. The mind fears that if it stops trying, something will go wrong. But experience shows otherwise. When effort leaves, the body relaxes, breathing deepens, muscles soften. The mind becomes quieter, not empty, just less insistent. This quiet allows perception to widen. You notice things you missed before. The sound of the room, the weight of your body, the rhythm of breath. These sensations anchor you without effort. The Stoics valued this grounded awareness. They believed that calm perception is the foundation of good judgment. A tense mind reacts. A calm mind responds. This distinction matters. Response comes from clarity. Reaction comes from pressure. Effort keeps pressure alive. Letting effort go removes the pressure. Calm appears as a result. This does not mean you never try again. Effort will return when action is needed. Calm does not eliminate effort. It regulates it. The Stoics believed that strength comes from this regulation, from knowing when to engage and when to step back. Calm is the space between these movements. It is not passive, it is poised. You may notice that when calm appears, decisions feel easier. Not because they are simpler, but because you are no longer forcing them. This ease is not laziness. It is efficiency. Effort used at the right time is far more effective than constant effort. Understanding this changes how you approach your own mind. You stop trying to calm yourself. You stop demanding peace. You simply stop adding tension. And in that absence, calm emerges, quietly, naturally. The Stoics believe that the highest form of control is knowing when not to control. Calm is the result of that wisdom, not something you chase, something that returns when you step out of the way. Lesson 18. Tonight is allowed to be incomplete. There is a quiet pressure many people carry into the night. The pressure to finish, to resolve, to understand. The mind believes that rest must be earned by completion, that only when everything is settled can it finally relax. But life does not work in complete cycles. There is always something unfinished. The Stoic thinkers understood this reality well. They lived with uncertainty, interruption, and loss. They did not wait for closure to find peace. They learned to rest inside incompleteness. This is difficult for the modern mind. We are taught to finish tasks, to close loops, to solve problems. So when night comes and things remain open, the mind feels uneasy. It tells itself that stopping now is wrong, that something important is being neglected. This belief creates tension. But incompleteness is not failure. It is the natural state of life. You may notice how often the mind returns to unfinished thoughts. A decision that still feels unclear. A conversation that ended without resolution. A problem that does not yet have an answer. The mind treats these as urgent, not because action is possible, but because incompleteness feels uncomfortable. Yet discomfort does not mean danger. The Stoics believed that peace comes not from finishing everything, but from accepting what cannot be finished yet. They understood that forcing closure creates more strain than relief. Some things require time. Some things clarify only after distance. Trying to complete them prematurely only adds pressure. You may have experienced moments when you stopped trying to resolve something and clarity arrived later on its own. Not because you worked harder, but because you stopped interfering. This is the paradox of incompleteness. Allowing it often leads to resolution. Fighting it delays it. The night is not designed for completion. It is designed for recovery. Recovery restores the mind's ability to handle unfinished things later. When the mind refuses to rest because things are incomplete, it weakens its own capacity. The Stoics did not believe that rest was a reward for productivity. They believed rest was a requirement for wisdom. A tired mind does not resolve problems. It multiplies them. This is why accepting incompleteness is not indulgence. It is responsibility. Responsibility to your own clarity. You may feel resistance to this idea. A voice inside may say, "If I stop now, I'm avoiding something." But stopping is not avoiding when nothing can be done. It is acknowledging limits. Limits of time, limits of energy, limits of perspective. The Stoics respected these limits. They believed that respecting limits is a sign of intelligence. Intelligence knows when effort helps and when it harms. At night, effort often harms. You may notice that when you accept incompleteness, the body responds. The shoulders drop slightly. Breathing becomes slower. Not because the problem vanished, but because the fight ended. The fight against incompleteness is what creates tension. When the fight ends, relief appears. This relief does not mean you stopped caring. It means you stopped demanding answers before they were available. The Stoics believed that patience is not passive waiting. It is active trust in time. Time reveals things that force cannot. When you allow tonight to remain incomplete, you give time room to work. You do not lose ground. You preserve energy. This energy will be needed later when action is possible. Trying to act too early often leads to mistakes. Resting now prevents that. The mind often equates activity with progress, but progress has rhythms. There are moments of action and moments of pause. Ignoring pause breaks the rhythm. The Stoics aligned themselves with this natural rhythm. They did not rush to close every loop. They trusted that some loops close themselves when left alone. This trust is not naive. It is based on observation. Many things in life resolve without being forced. Conversations soften over time. Perspectives change. Emotions settle. But only if they are given space. The night provides that space. It asks nothing from you except permission to pause. When you accept that tonight can remain incomplete, you stop negotiating with the mind. You stop promising yourself that you will solve everything tomorrow. You simply allow rest. This allowance feels subtle. It does not announce itself. But it changes how the night feels. Thoughts may still appear, but they no longer demand resolution. They are acknowledged and left open. This openness is not chaos. It is order without force. The Stoics believe that order does not always come from control. Sometimes it comes from release. Release of expectations, release of urgency, release of the need to finish. Accepting incompleteness restores balance. It tells the mind that it does not need to work endlessly, that it can stop without failing. This message is powerful. It quiets the inner pressure that keeps people awake. It allows the mind to settle without explanation. You are not required to close every door tonight. Some doors are meant to remain open for now. They will not harm you. They will wait. And when the time comes, you will meet them with more clarity because you allowed yourself to rest inside incompleteness. That is not weakness. It is wisdom practiced quietly. Lesson 19. Night is not a time for decisions. The night has a way of asking questions that feel urgent. Questions about direction, about choices, about what should be done next. They arrive quietly, but they carry weight. The mind interprets this weight as importance. It tells itself that if a question feels heavy, it must be answered now. But heaviness does not mean readiness. The Stoic thinkers understood this distinction clearly. They believed that judgment depends not only on information, but on condition. A mind under strain does not see options accurately. At night, the mind is not at its clearest. Energy is lower. Perspective is narrower. This is not a flaw, it is biology. Yet many people try to make decisions when their mental resources are depleted. They weigh choices. They reconsider paths. They imagine consequences. Not because action is possible, but because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. The night amplifies this discomfort. Silence removes distraction. Fatigue reduces flexibility. Together, they make questions feel more final than they are. You may recognize this experience. A decision you postponed during the day returns at night with urgency. It demands resolution. But when morning comes, the same decision feels different, less dramatic, more manageable. The situation did not change. Your condition did. The Stoics placed great importance on timing. They believed that wisdom includes knowing when not to decide. They did not see delay as weakness. They saw it as discernment. Some decisions require clarity. Clarity requires rest. Trying to decide without clarity leads to regret. This is why the night is a poor advisor. Not because it brings bad ideas, but because it distorts proportion. At night, risks feel larger. Mistakes feel permanent. The mind loses its sense of scale. This distortion makes decisions feel heavier than they are. The Stoics believe that decisions should be made from steadiness, not from tension. Steadiness does not exist when the mind is tired. You may notice that at night, your tolerance for ambiguity decreases. You want answers, not because answers are available, but because the mind seeks relief. Relief, however, does not come from deciding. It comes from resting. Decisions made in fatigue are often driven by the desire to escape discomfort. This leads to choices that solve short-term anxiety but create long-term consequences. The Stoics warned against this. They believed that discomfort should not be the guide. Judgment should be. Judgment requires distance. Distance is created by rest. Night is not meant to collapse distance. It is meant to restore it. When you stop trying to decide at night, something changes. The questions do not disappear, but their grip weakens. They no longer feel like emergencies. They become what they are, questions waiting for the right moment. This waiting is not avoidance, it is respect for process. The Stoics believed that good decisions often emerge naturally when the mind is prepared. Preparedness is not constant thought, it is balance. You may have experienced this before. You struggled with a decision late at night, feeling trapped. In the morning, the same issue seemed simpler. Options appeared that you could not see before. This is not coincidence. Rest restores perspective. Perspective restores judgment. Trying to decide without perspective is like trying to see clearly in low light. The shapes are there, but the edges are blurred. The night does not offer clarity. It offers recovery. Using it for decisions misuses its purpose. The Stoics aligned their thinking with the rhythms of the mind. They accepted that certain mental tasks belong to certain moments. Reflection, yes. Decision, no. Night is for observing, not concluding. It allows thoughts to surface without demanding answers. This observation can be valuable. You may notice patterns, emotional responses, recurring concerns. These observations inform future decisions, but they are not decisions themselves. This separation is important. You gather information at night. You decide when clarity returns. When you respect this boundary, mental pressure decreases. You stop forcing resolution. You allow uncertainty to exist without immediately reacting to it. This allowance calms the mind, not because everything is settled, but because nothing is being rushed. The Stoics believed that patience is a form of strength. Patience resists urgency when urgency is misleading. Nighttime urgency is often misleading. It feels real, but it is fueled by fatigue. Recognizing this protects you. You no longer treat nighttime thoughts as final verdicts. You treat them as signals that rest is needed. This changes your relationship with thinking. Thoughts still appear. Questions still arise, but they no longer command action. You acknowledge them and let them wait. Waiting does not weaken them, it refines them. By morning, many questions lose their intensity. Some answers become obvious. Others reveal themselves as less important. This is the benefit of restraint. The Stoics believe that inner stability comes from knowing when to act and when to pause. Night belongs to pause. When you accept that night is not a time for decisions, you remove a major source of pressure. You stop demanding certainty from a tired mind. You give yourself permission to wait. That permission is not laziness. It is wisdom aligned with reality. The night does not require conclusions. It requires trust. Trust that clarity will return. Trust that decisions can wait. Trust that rest is not avoidance. When you trust this, the mind softens. Urgency fades, and the night becomes what it was meant to be. A space where the mind recovers its ability to see clearly again. Lesson 20. Time solves what control makes worse. There are moments when control helps, and there are moments when it quietly damages what time would have resolved on its own. The mind does not always recognize the difference. When something feels uncertain or uncomfortable, control feels like the responsible response. You check, you adjust, you interfere, not because action is required, but because waiting feels risky. The Stoic thinkers paid close attention to this tendency. They observed that many things in life do not improve through force. They improve through time. Time allows emotions to settle. It allows information to surface. It allows perspective to change. Control interrupts this process. It rushes what needs space. You may have experienced this yourself. A disagreement feels intense at first. Words are sharp. Emotions are close to the surface. If you intervene immediately, trying to resolve everything at once, you may say too much. Later, with time, the same situation feels lighter. What felt urgent loses its edge. Time did not erase the issue. It softened it. The Stoics understood that time is an ally, not an enemy, but only when it is allowed to work. Control often comes from impatience. The mind wants certainty now, relief now, closure now. This impatience creates tension. It pushes solutions before conditions are ready, and premature solutions often create new problems. The Stoics believe that wisdom includes restraint. Restraint does not mean inaction. It means waiting until action is effective. There is a difference. You can see this in how emotions behave. Strong emotions rise quickly. They demand expression. If you act while they are high, your response is shaped by intensity. If you wait, intensity fades. The response changes. Time creates space between feeling and action. Control collapses that space. This is why control can make things worse. It removes the buffer that allows better judgment. The mind often fears that if it does not intervene, things will spiral. But many situations stabilize naturally when they are not constantly manipulated. This does not apply to everything. Some things require immediate action, but many do not. The challenge is knowing the difference. The Stoics believe that unnecessary action is as harmful as inaction. They valued appropriate action. Appropriate action considers timing. Time reveals what force cannot. It reveals what truly matters and what fades on its own. You may notice this with worries. A concern feels overwhelming at night. You think about it repeatedly. In the morning, the same concern feels smaller. Nothing changed externally. Time passed. Sleep restored clarity. This is not coincidence. The mind needs distance to assess accurately. Control reduces distance. Time restores it. The Stoics trusted this process. They did not rush to fix everything. They allowed situations to unfold while staying attentive. This attentiveness was not anxious. It was patient. Patience does not mean passivity. It means confidence in process. Confidence that not everything requires intervention. You may feel resistance to this idea. A voice inside may say, "If I don't act, I'm being careless." But care does not always look like action. Sometimes care looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like allowing things to breathe. Control often stems from fear of loss. The fear that if you do not manage something, it will slip away. But some things cannot be held tighter without being damaged. Relationships are an example. Too much control suffocates connection. Trust allows space. Space allows growth. Time plays a role here. Time shows whether something strengthens or weakens naturally. Control interferes with this signal. The Stoics believed that life reveals itself when it is not constantly corrected. This belief required humility. The humility to admit that you do not see everything at once, that your perspective is partial. Time expands perspective. When you allow time to work, you gain information without effort. You see patterns. You notice what repeats and what dissolves. This information is valuable. It guides action more effectively than constant monitoring. Control demands energy. Time works without draining you. This is why exhaustion often accompanies control. You are doing work that time would have done for free. The Stoics understood energy as a limited resource. They did not waste it where patience was sufficient. They believed that strength lies in knowing when to step back. Stepping back does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means choosing a different tool. Time is a tool, one that operates quietly. You may notice moments when you stop interfering and something resolves itself. A misunderstanding clears. A decision becomes obvious. An emotion fades. These moments teach something important. Not all progress comes from effort. Some progress comes from allowing. The night is a reminder of this. At night, action is limited. Control has fewer options. Time, however, continues. It integrates experiences. It organizes memory. It restores balance. Trying to control at night often disrupts this process. The Stoics aligned themselves with this natural rhythm. They respected the difference between moments for action and moments for patience. Time is not wasted when it is used correctly. It prepares the ground for wiser action later. Understanding this changes how you relate to uncertainty. You stop trying to fix everything immediately. You allow some things to remain unresolved. This does not weaken you. It steadies you. You conserve energy. You preserve clarity. When action is truly needed, you are ready, not drained by unnecessary control. The Stoics believe that control has its place, but time has a larger one. Knowing when to use each is a form of intelligence. When you allow time to solve what control makes worse, you stop fighting life's natural process. You cooperate with it, and cooperation, more than force, is what allows things to settle into place.